Professor Green, thanks very much for taking a moment to personalize your appearance today. I appreciate the connection to your father's military service and to the Thousand Islands region, where I have the honor to represent and, of course, have a kinship with your father through the opportunity that I've had to serve as well. I'd also just like to quickly observe the photo over your left shoulder. That's lovely. And while we've read about your background, I think that photo probably says more than I read in your biography about you. So I appreciate that very much, sir. I'd like to get through. I have 5 minutes remaining for questions, and so I'd like to get through 4 if I could. And on blind trusts, you mentioned that if I could characterize it as a perception of inefficiency in having a designated public office holder sell their assets instead of placing them in a blind trust. The commissioner, during his appearance, which you're familiar with, said that the trustees generally don't sell what's placed into the trust. And so the public office holder knows exactly what went in. So is there an issue with not just the characterization of it being a blind trust, but also with the reality of them knowing, and their advisors knowing, and their cabinet colleagues and other officials knowing exactly what went in?
Well, that's a very important question. And I have talked with former public office holders who, having very high ethical standards, have told their trustee, you can sell anything in my trust. I just don't want to know whether my assets are still in there or if they've changed. And then after he became free of being a public office holder, he was quite shocked at what had been sold and what he thought were the very poor decisions of the trustee about the replacements. So it's a chance that public office holders take. It's something that having these required divestments, and the blind trust being one possibility in politics, is only about 30 to 40 years old. We're experimenting. And this is why I think it might be good to have a major study of various different systems in Canada and other countries, and what works best, what needs to be changed. It's a complex issue. But I think if, once again, I think the focus is mostly on the screens that have been set up for Mark Carney, and will they work? Will they create problems? Only time will tell for that.
Okay, Mr. Barrett. Sorry, Mr. Green. Mr. Barrett has a question.
Okay.
So, in the case of you raised the Prime Minister and his screen. So during the most recent campaign, the Prime Minister said, and it was reported on, that he had crafted the Liberal Party platform. Now, at that time, he was just exiting his private sector career, and of course was very aware of all of the investing that he had done, and what was inside the investments that he had created for Brookfield Asset Management, those particular funds. And at that time, the screens weren't in place yet, and so the timing of his Mr. Carney's election as leader of his party, his appointment as Prime Minister, and then the subsequent election campaign, that all took place before these measures had been taken. But the policy document that underpins now the political document that underpins the government's policy documents was written by him without any, any space between. So does the system protect public confidence of our institutions in a case like that?
Well, we are never going to get a system that is perfect. We have to experiment, and we really have to depend on the integrity of public office holders to make difficult decisions like this. My experience with looking at political scandals federally and provincially is that the people that we have to worry about are those whose finances are close to the line, and they might be tempted to do something unethical to make sure that they have a nest egg when they retire. If someone is very, very well off, they're much less likely to be tempted to benefit themselves because they're already pretty well off. But as I say, you raise legitimate questions, and it's something worth looking into more thoroughly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Madame.
On est avec.
We have a prime minister now who owns the Brookfield Assets management that controls 916 companies and manages billions of dollars and has interests in the 5 major fields that are impacted by Bill C-5. Do you not believe that the screen that applies to Prime Minister Carney through his chief of staff and through the clerk, without divulging the interests of people regarding the interests of Brookfield Assets? There's no research done on that, to my knowledge. I asked the question to the commissioner and he did not have an answer. Do you not believe that the screen is perhaps insufficient for conflict of interest? And final question, and perhaps I'll come back to this later. Some positions, some jobs in the private sector might make it so that their work is incompatible with becoming prime minister on an ethically.
Let me deal with your second question first, because that's a new one that I haven't thought of before. I'm an optimist. I think that no matter what someone's background is or has been, I think that everybody should be capable of becoming prime minister. Although it's good to have a runway in order to prepare for this. And of course, the last year we haven't had much of a runway. And your first question was, and can you remind me, please?
Compte tenu des intérêts.
Because of the interests of Brookfield and the bill, the prime minister is making all decisions. It's not just a minister in a cabinet of ministers. It's the prime minister who's giving all of these directives. And even though he has a blind trust, the decisions that he makes will increase his assets, even if he doesn't know by how much they will increase. So do you not believe that that screen is perhaps insufficient?
Can get a brief response, Mr. Green, please.
Yeah. There will be some situations where perhaps the chief of staff will say to the prime minister, this particular piece of legislation, I'm afraid, might affect the value of your, significantly, the value of your assets that went into the trust. Maybe it's, for this particular thing, it's time to just actually go beyond the screens to disclose what is still in the trust and say, look, this is what I've done. This is my decision. I've recused myself. Leave it up to the public to decide whether I've done the right thing. So there may well be some difficult decisions to make in the future about this. But once again, these are complex questions that I really hope that there will be further studies about.
OK. Thank you, Mr. Green. Merci, M. Thériault. Le premier tour est
That concludes the first round. We're going to move on to the second round of questions.
You have 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Professor Green, I'd like to ask you some questions about ethics screens that can be set up by the Ethics Commissioner pursuant to Section 29 of the Act in respect of public office holders. At the end of your opening statement, you spoke of the importance of public confidence in the robustness of our ethics laws. And in that regard, there has been some criticism of ethics screens from the standpoint of transparency, insofar as they effectively enable a public office holder to get around the reporting requirements under Section 21 sub 1 of the Conflict of Interest Act, which requires a public office holder to publicly report each occasion that they recuse themselves to avoid a conflict of interest. I'd be interested in your thoughts.
In my past life, when I worked for the Alberta government, my wife was an auditor who sometimes was asked to audit some of the agencies that I was responsible for. So ethics screens had to be set up for both of us. So I understand being covered by an ethics screen. And you have to ask a lot of hard questions about the specific situation. It's hard to generalize about them. But I think in the end, it's up to the integrity of the people involved to make sure that you're trying to make decisions that are as impartial as possible, that are in the public good. And you have to be able to defend your actions as being ethical and in the public good. And as I say, there's no, there isn't a perfect cast in stone solution. It depends on each individual situation.
I think what you have said, or what I understand you to have said, is that we are, with respect, for example, with respect to the Prime Minister's ethics screen, for example, to simply trust the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Privy Council, and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, both of whom serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. Can you understand that many Canadians, from the standpoint of having confidence that the ethics screen is working, might find that wanting?
I think that many Canadians don't understand the difference between a potential conflict of interest and a real conflict of interest. All of you, and I'm sure you yourself, have found yourself in a potential conflict of interest. There's no corruption involved in that. It's simply part of life. You have to take appropriate measures to make sure potential conflicts don't become real conflicts or apparent conflicts. And if you don't take those steps, or other people don't advise you to take those steps, then there's trouble. So I think many Canadians see potential conflicts of interest and on the horizon for Prime Minister Carney, because of who he is and his background.
If I may, sir, what's lacking is transparency. We're simply left to trust. So, again, I think that is problematic. And again, I mean, how is that better than simply requiring that the Prime Minister publicly disclose, publicly report each and every time a conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest arises with respect to Brookfield or any of the companies that are part of that very vast ethics screen, 89 companies.
Yeah, that's, you know, it's a very complex question, because that sort of information might might create problems on its own. There may be people, dishonest people, who want to try to impress the Prime Minister by investing in their assets. There may be foreign governments who may be trying to influence Canada by investing in the confirmed prime minister's assets. And so there are all kinds of problems that could result from being overzealous. I think the system that we have right now, based on our 40 years of experience with these kinds of things, works as well as it can. It's not perfect. There will need to be changes made in the future. But as I say, these are such complex questions. Maybe it's time for a royal commission to look into them more thoroughly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Ms. Church for...
Hello, Mr. Green. My question is, the democratic structure of the UK, Australia, are there any opportunities to look into those countries to inspire us regarding sanctions and transparency for ethical issues, or are there any other countries that you're aware of?
It's always worthwhile looking at other countries. And the countries you mentioned have all learned from Canada. We were really at the forefront of improving standards of ethics in politics beginning in the late 1980s. But those countries have sometimes made advances beyond where we are. So it's, I know that ethics commissioners have their own network, including your ethics conflict of interest and ethics commissioner. And in addition to looking at best practices from each other, they look at other countries. They have speakers often from other countries. And so, yes, it's worthwhile keeping abreast.
Merci beaucoup. Écoutez, j'ai lu que...
Thank you. In the conflict of interest and lobbying rules, and they were improved, you said that they were improved since the 90s, but that there were still obvious shortcomings. And so in 2025, and in the case that's before us with the Prime Minister having interests in hundreds of companies, what would be a priority in your view in 2025? How can we rebuild trust in our institutions? And how can we ensure that in the future we have control over this, over all potential situations?
What we want to make sure is that there aren't conflict of interest scandals where there's a proven real conflict of interest. And I think it's going to be very important for the Prime Minister and his advisors to make sure that those kinds of situations are avoided. I think because of the ethics screens having been put in place for the Prime Minister, I think they will be avoided. But what concerns me is that other cabinet ministers may not be as well informed. So that's why I think that all cabinet ministers should meet in person with the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner to better understand the rules. That will keep them out of trouble.
Merci beaucoup. Croyez-vous
Thank you. Do you believe we should expand the Conflict of Interest Act to include the appearance of conflict of interest? Is that something that we should look into in order to ensure that if there's the appearance of a conflict of interest that we could act and investigate, or should we wait for a real conflict of interest?
I think that the ethics commissioner should advise with regard to how elected MPs and cabinet ministers can avoid apparent conflict of interest as well as real conflict of interest. The public doesn't understand the difference between the two. It's pretty arcane for them. So if you're found to be in an apparent conflict of interest in the public eye, it's almost as bad as being in a real conflict of interest, sometimes worse. So yes, I think the act should include both. The penalties for being in an apparent conflict of interest shouldn't be as severe as being in a real conflict of interest. But I think all politicians need to make sure that they need to avoid those as well. But as I mentioned earlier, it's something I think your committee should look into. If the act is going to be amended to include apparent conflict of interest, how can this be done in the most effective way?
Dernière question pour vous. Merci pour votre réponse.
Thank you for your answer. My colleague was asking you this question earlier. If there's the appearance of conflict of interest, for example, with companies being impacted by federal decisions, the Commissioner of Ethics is the person who will say if there was a conflict or not. Do you believe that that person might be overwhelmed or have too much to look into and things might fall through the cracks? Do you think that this is something that could happen with the current structure with the Office of the Ethics Commissioner? We will need a quick response, please.
Time, go ahead.
Well, the Ethics Commissioner has nearly 60 people to help with the various duties of the office. It's a very complex office. And I would rely on the annual reports of the Commissioner as to what changes might be helpful to make it work more effectively.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. We're